caught up in anger. Sometimes we're caught up in despair. Sometimes we are fearful. There's a lot of people who are experts in conversations about grief, and we see a different kind of grief that we might see in times of war, frankly. There's a collective grief that people are experiencing in terms of an ultimate fear about safety or the loved ones, or for those of us that might be living alone, not being able to have human touch for weeks on end. There's lots of things that we are missing and even mourning, and I think that's fair and real. And I don't think hope makes that evaporate, but it is something that can help us balance and move forward when we're feeling that kind of anxiety, even depression, or just nervousness. So, you know, I'm all in with this hope thing, folks. I believe, though, and some of you have heard me say this over and over and over again, is that hope isn't a wish. And I think a lot of times we get confused because we often, yes, this is in place of the discussion on Zionism. So I think, because I got a message, I think that the question of hope is not something like wishful thinking. I don't think that hope is something that we kind of wish upon the star, even though that's how we tend to talk about hope. I think hope is a conviction. And frankly, even though this conversation about hope in the midst of coronavirus is replacing the conversation about Zionism, for me, it's coming from the same place. Because my look at Israel isn't just about sanctuary or refuge, but is the embodiment of hope for the Jewish people. And it's those messages of leaving in Egypt and journeying toward a promised land that activates my sense of hopefulness. One of the things that I even thought that I would share, I'm gonna pull up a picture for you. It's this ancient German map. And I love this map, not only because Jewish men aren't so great at asking directions, and this will lead you to nowhere, other than to hope, because you have the continents as the leaves, and on the inside over here is Jerusalem, right? If you can probably find it in your button at the very top of your computer screens if you wanted to enlarge it. I think this message of Jerusalem is really powerful, helping us to see, here I can even make it a little bit larger for you, helping you to see that Jerusalem is at the center of the world. And if Jerusalem is at the center and everything is connected, and even stories of creation say that Jerusalem is sort of like the world's navel, all of creation came out of Jerusalem, I find this as another pictorial representation of hope, not just of Israel as center, but of something that a place that ties together all of the world. The artist there wasn't even Jewish, but had a sense of bringing everybody together. And I wanted to share a couple of things with you, and then to have a real conversation, not just a lecture, not just a class, but to share a couple of things with you that helps me stay grounded in this time of uncertainty. So let's start there. And I don't know if anybody has something that they'd like to share first, or ask first, or would like to put out there for me to respond to. I'd welcome you to put it into the chat. And we can go from there. And I can pick up what's on your mind. That was really the hope for this. I can pick up what's on your mind and some of your challenges or questions in the midst of this conversation. So we can take a couple of seconds, and if anybody has anything that they want to put out there, you can send it to Joy Alice or to me privately, or certainly to just post it to everyone, and that would be groovy. I'll tell you in the meantime, one thing that's kind of on my mind, and I know some of you might have heard this from me, but whenever I am feeling like I'm struggling, the place that I go is this one particular text in the book of Exodus. And, you know, the background to it is, I think it has a lot to do when I felt hopeless as a kid when my father died, and I'm 15 years old, and people were really aggravating me in my grief because they were saying all of these things that didn't feel good or comforting or helpful to me. And later on in life, I found this text from the book of Exodus, and the beginning of it is really interesting. The beginning is Moses is totally lost and frustrated after going up to the mountain at Sinai, and brings down the tablets, sees the golden calf, and throws them down. And before God dictates the second set, Moses is up on a mountaintop and is sharing this personal crisis, sharing everything that Moses is feeling. And the text says, you know, I'm not going to go unless you go first, God. I'm in this. I'm happy to do this. You've asked me to do this, to lead your people, but don't make me go until you go first. And God says, okay, I hear you. I will do that. I will go first. And God puts Moses in the cleft of this rock, right? So imagine Moses being like surrounded by three sides of rock. And then God walks. It's a very anthropomorphic setting. God walks forward. And because nobody can see God's face in quotes, God is protecting Moses and puts out God's own hand, right? And then you can only see my back, says God. You can only see my back. So this little episode, and then I'm going to show you one piece of the text. This little episode is really significant to me because here's Moses saying, I'm really hurting. And God's like, okay, I'm going to lighten your burden. I'm going to go first. You followed me. And I'm going to make, and here's the text, I will make all my goodness pass before you. I'm going to proclaim before you my name. It's going to be the Hebrew letters of Yud He Vav He, and the grace that I grant and the compassion that I show. And then for me, it's not just that God is blocking Moses from seeing God's face, but it's almost like some of my mentors who would take their hands and put it on my shoulder. You know, that comforting message of saying, all right, I'm here. I've heard you. Walk with me. Walk with me. Now, the hand, from a very literal point of view, is to block Moses from seeing, because you can't see God's face and survive. It's not to block out God, but it's to actually be a protective hand. And so the first thing when I'm feeling vulnerable is, and thinking about having hope, it's the idea that God's walking with me and I'm not alone. And there's a protective hand there. Whether we look at that literally or metaphorically, you choose. I could do both. But this idea of being vulnerable, having a crisis, God going first, taking me along for the ride. I'm never alone. And there's a protective hand, in quotes, that says that God's got my back. You know, for me, for those that don't know me, I have a very much of a roll up your sleeves kind of theology. We can talk about theologians and philosophers, but for me, it's very practical. And this text is saying, I've got your back here by covering your face so you don't perish. Think Indiana Jones, right? Raiders of the Lost Ark, the other Holy Torah story. All of those Nazis in the scene, they didn't die because they were bad. They died because they were watching God's face. And Indiana Jones knew his Torah, and he told the woman that he was tied up with, whatever her name was, close your eyes, don't look at these angelic beings. And then all of the Nazis, of course, were killed in this really gruesome scene for, I don't know how old I was, maybe 10. And I thought at the time that was very cool. But the idea is nobody can survive seeing God face to face. So it was an act of protecting. It's an act of protecting. And then I'm going to pull up the screen and we'll talk about this, and we'll talk some of the questions that I've received. Here's the screen. And I want to make it really clear to you. It says, God answered, in case you want to look at the Hebrew, I'm at verse 19. God answered, I will make all my goodness pass before you. So God is just Tov. I'm going to have goodness pass before you. And I'm going to tell you my real name, not just terms for my name, but I'm going to say what my name is to you. You get, Moses, to call me by my first name. And then it says, the grace that I grant and the compassion that I show. That's what Moses is following. Goodness, grace, which Jews sometimes are uncomfortable about using that term, but grace, chen, in Hebrew, is unconditional love. So there's goodness, there's grace, and there's compassion. That's how Moses sees God at a moment of hardship and crisis. And frankly, that's how I see God at a moment of crisis. Goodness, grace, because I'm not perfect. And if God loves me anyway, that's pretty awesome. So goodness, grace, and compassion. That's what I need in order to keep hope, to know that ultimately God is represented by those things. And if you think there's truth to that, again, literally or metaphorically, spiritually, symbolically, ethically, however you want to read that, if that is true, then every person who's created, including the ones we're disagreeing with, including the ones that are leading, that you might disagree with, including the ones who I'm sure are doing the best they can with what they've got, they're just human beings trying to figure things out. Most of them are not setting us up and putting us in harm's way on purpose. But if we want to be godly and keep hope, and hope is a worldview, it's a conviction that I'm living out my life. If it matters to me to see that, then I'm going to bring my goodness and grace and compassion out into the world. And I think when we feel empowered that we can make change, well, that's a good piece of hope. And if I can be like Moses in this episode and feel like, okay, I'm not alone, and I know these qualities, and I know I have a job to do, and even though I'm going to lead these people, they're going to complain a lot, and they're not always going to like it. I'm going to do the best that I can, says Moses, not me, although I get that feeling. If Moses is going to go forward and do those things, then he can feel support. And it's a little easier to be courageous if you feel that people are with you, others are with you, God is with you, that we are shoulder to shoulder. And I think that's another way to feel hope. We feel hopeless when we feel alone and really lonely. And that's why between the JCC and the congregations in town and the other organizations, or maybe your CrossFit, are trying to use a screen in order to build these connections. And I think that's really significant. And if we can see God's goodness, grace, and compassion in ourselves, then we can have that in others. And I think that's a big piece of what I think we can contend with. So even if we're alone in our own houses, we don't have to settle for being lonely. Even if we have other people in our houses, you can still feel lonely. So how do we open up these doors, these channels? So that's the first thing that I thought I'd kind of put out there and share. I think Jeff in the chat is talking about gratitude, and it's the second thing I wanted to talk about. But let's talk about for a minute goodness and goodness and grace and compassion. What do you think about that? Does that help anybody with any hope, or is this just when, you know, the rabbi puts everybody asleep in the sanctuary? What do you think? David, you want to share something? You have to unmute yourself. I can't do it for you. There you go.
The challenge for me, and I hope this is not tangential because it was something that got triggered when you were speaking, is to have hope in the face of cynicism, my cynicism, that, you know, it's really hard for me when I look at a void of leadership, either wherever that is. I mean, I even think of, you know, my professionally, my history and stuff. When people choose to try, I guess, to convey hope, I don't know, but are very either narcissistic or short-sighted. And I think of some of the political leaders who are opening up prematurely, in my, you know, and certainly more important than my judgment, you know, so many experts. When people think they know it all, or when people are so obviously coming from a worldview that is completely based on what their needs are, it's really hard for me to feel hopeful. And I mean, I love what you're saying. I truly do. And as you know, I've certainly been in enough audiences where I've heard this before, and it's good to hear it again at this particular time. I'm just sharing my challenge around that is to be hopeful and feel like that things will get better. I think that the way this works and the latest stuff is that this thing is with us until a vaccine is developed in some way, and that there'll be spikes or whatever. And so sometimes that really, it feels very, very long, very, very far away, that there will be some relief. And doesn't do me any good to feel this way, but that's okay. Enough said.
Well, look, you know, David, thank you for sharing that, and I appreciate your honesty. And I think you're not alone in that. There's a lot of people that are feeling that whether there's a lack of leadership or commitment, or these protesters in Denver that went out, you know, advocating for an opening up of the state, and then you see these healthcare workers stand in the middle of a street, masked and in their scrubs, and you know, it's, for some people, they're talking about that like a, you know, Tiananmen Square kind of a thing from years ago, right? Standing in front of the tank, that image. And, but whatever your position is, whether opening gradually, more, less, not, whatever, the value of hope, I guess I'm going to say something that feels a little bold. I'm not willing to let anybody rob me of that. I have to let them take it. If I'm not going to have hope, then I'm going to be willing to kind of give it over because of my feelings. And I think concern, anger, challenge is all reasonable, and I think you're entitled to it. Having doubts, I think, is not a bad thing and can be healthy. Skepticism and cynicism become, I think, a little bit more dangerous for us. And that's when we might be at a point when somebody might be able to pull hope out of me. And I'm saying, let's take it back. Because hope isn't wishing. And if it's a conviction, if it's really a conviction, and it's the way I see the world, then whatever policies there are or are not, whomever is going to figure out how do we manage this, we have an opportunity to determine how we're going to act and how we are going to respond on any issue, right? And if you feel that you have a voice and can be empowered and have a sense of gratitude, which hopefully we'll come back to in a second, we can have a sense of gratitude that, boy, I'm doing okay. And even in the midst of having a comfortable space, and for me, an office where I don't have to share with my kids, and working from home and some of those other kinds of things, I feel great gratitude. And yet, this is also hard, and that's okay. We don't have to deny the feelings of being that this is hard or even scary. But I hope that we don't let others take our hope, because that's more than just a feeling. Hope is a conviction. And if you can buy that, then nobody can take it without your consent. And that's what I think is I'm just throwing the word that you use, David, back at you a little bit. That's my concern about cynicism. That in some ways we give consent for someone to make me so angry or scared or disappointed, and we kind of live there for a while. So I don't want to be cynical. I can have doubts, I can be angry, I can be worried, I can be scared. I can have all of those things. But when I get to cynicism, that's a little more poisonous. And I think we can throw it back. I'm willing to reclaim my truths and soul and goodness and grace and compassion. And that's one rabbi's way of dealing with that. So somebody else have a thought?
I do.
Yeah, go ahead, Susan.
Of course, Rabbi, you're absolutely right. It seems.
Of course.
I mean that truly and respectfully. One thing I seem to have learned from this administration is if you have integrity, if you play by the rules, it's not a level field, because you're dealing with people who will lie, manipulate things, distort things. And that's where I get really stuck. sort of the idea that nice guys finish last.
Yeah, well, I definitely felt that way when I was 17, right? Nice guys finish last. Nobody wanted to date the nice guys until later. Kidding aside, look, I hear you, but I'm not learning that lesson. I'm not, and I can't, because too much is at stake if I feel really that nice guys finish last. I think that I think that folks in our day and age have actually just become too complacent, right? There's a lot of clergy and pastors and all of those folks, my friends, they'll talk about affluenza. When we become kind of comfortable, I don't mean rich, but comfortable enough that we forget about seeing some of the hardships, because it's not really touching me the way it touched my folks who were so poor they only had lettuce and tomato in their sandwiches, right? Those kinds of things, right? Walking to school uphill both ways, barefoot, those, you know, and I don't believe that nice guys finish last. I think that it's going to take some time. And I think that there's going to be a place when people put this back in place again. I don't remember a time when McCarthy was in the Congress. I only know it from books. I don't have that memory. And I'm sure that was a devastating time for people to live in this world. And yet, we got through it. How does somebody like Dr. King, you know, do what he did and teach the way he taught, and from conviction talked about love and hope? Because if he only went to how he felt, he wouldn't have done what he did, and we wouldn't be quoting him today, right? And there are others who had similar feelings, but Moses came back and followed God out of conviction, not out of feeling. His feelings said, I'm out of here. His feelings said, this is too hard. His conviction, with the support and presence of, in my terms, the Holy One, enabled him to find the strength that he had in order to move forward. So when you are scared of an administration or a certain kind of a leader, then how are we going to respond? We can either stay in the depths, in the valley of shadows, right? In the valley of the shadow of death, not death, but in the valley, a low place, in a shadow where it's dark, but we're still going. But that's how we feel. And if we can get out of the valley of shadows and walk forward, well, then something else can take place. And I'll piggyback, just even looking at Kirsten, who wrote in the chat, about looking at the history of the Jewish people and continue to hope and keep going. Well, I think we're not always so good at building up our muscle memory, and resilience is a muscle that needs to be invested in, right? And I think from Jewish history, we have seen lots of resilience for centuries and centuries and centuries. And I agree that, I can focus on what I'm focusing on, our story. And that's why I brought a text like from Moses to say that we don't always have to look at other traditions or other sources. we have this in our own house, if you will, to say what's going to be a source of inspiration for me to push out the cynicism, push out the hurt. I take that back, not to push out the hurt, to recognize the hurt, to name the hurt, and then to, the way some are saying, a sixth stage of grieving is actually finding meaning. So how do you find meaning in the chaos? And that, I think, is, I don't know, I feel like that's the sermon I've been giving for the last 6 weeks, right? How do we take fear and hurt and anger and find meaning? And the meaning for me is we can't be complacent. If good people do nothing, we're complicit. We have to speak up no matter who it is, and I hope it could be done with some level of being constructive. And if we are, I really do believe in it together. I do. It's corny, but if this virus has shown me anything, it is that we are much more connected than we want to believe. And that's how it spreads. So let's spread back. Let's spread hope and love and goodness and compassion and grace. Let's put that out there. And one of the ways of putting it out there is, for me, staying home, staying safe, ordering puzzles, don't share them, right? So, yeah, Sherry, I see your hand is up. See, Joy Alice, you have to know that at Har Hashem, we have so many people that are coming to all of these different things. They've all learned the buttons on how to raise hands in those functions. So good job.
You're well
good
trained.
Job for you. Well-trained Jews.
Well trained.
Yes. Go ahead.
So, I mean, the people here that have been on the other calls know I've had a couple of days of feeling frustrated, and yesterday was one of them again when I went out for my walk, and I was the only person wearing masks, the only person, and I walked past a golf course by where I live, and there were all these men out there playing golf, standing together, nobody was wearing a mask. And I think it was, it combined with my, the way I feel about reopening without testing and some of the things that, as I used to say when I would go to sporting events, they didn't call me and consult me when they made these decisions on what plays that you're going to make. So nobody called me and consulted me on what I thought. But the idea that it just upset me so much because it felt like people were complacent. All of a sudden, what is it? We're going to reopen, and now people are out playing golf, standing together, and everybody's doing all these things. So I did something yesterday that I would never have done and never have done since I was quite young. Was I called the governor's office, like right when I was on my walk, and I was connected to someone who listened to me. And I was just, because the other night when we were on the Holocaust Memorial, the presentation, and I listened to that gentleman, not Joseph, the other one, but I thought about Arnold, I'm sorry, I can remember his name. At a time when people gave their children, put them somewhere to keep them safe, and children were hidden, or people lived in basements or wherever, and they were able to get through that because they had this resilience to choose life. And I'm like, but why golf's not essential? You can't stay inside for a few more weeks or whatever. And it just really upset me because I was really focused on what was said that evening and that whole piece of like Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. And yet there's a majority of people, a lot of people out there, at least what I see, that seem to be like, no big deal. And so I have a lot of gratitude, I have a lot of hope, but the anger sort of creeps in when I see that. And that poor young man that answered the phone yesterday got an earful. But, you know, and he was very sweet. You know, he was like, oh, I can understand how you may feel that way. And typical customer service 101, you know, how to talk down the crazy lady on the phone. But, and what I said to him is I said, I appreciate your compassion and your empathy. However, I'd like an answer. So I would appreciate if somebody calls me back. My phone hasn't rung yet, so we'll see. I'll let you know. But honestly, that's where I was yesterday and I've never done that before.
Well,
So,
look, you know, more power to you for feeling that there's an issue and that you wanted to advocate. Moses does it to Pharaoh, so you can do it to Governor Polis. And so you're in good company. That's the easy part of the answer. The bigger part of it is when we feel that there's a question of ethics and confidence, we feel better when we feel empowered. And I think you have power as a voter, as a donor, as a citizen, as a Jew. I think that there are things that we can do so that you don't have to feel helpless, because the helplessness feeds the hopelessness. You know, what's the famous story? There's Hugo Gryn is a very famous British rabbi who died some years ago. And he was a Holocaust survivor. Hugo Gryn, Gryn. And there's a famous story that he recounted about an interaction with his father in one of the Holocaust, you know, concentration camps. I don't recall where he was, but he was a young kid, and his father wanted to say for Hanukkah, the blessing Shechianu, you know, thanking God for sustaining us and helping us to reach this season. He wanted to say Shechianu because it was the first night of Hanukkah, and he saved enough margarine from their rations in order to create a little bit of oil for the first night of Hanukkah. And so he brought his son, who became this very prominent rabbi, and the son says to the father, what are you doing? Look where we are. Well, why are you saying Shechianu? It makes no sense. And the father says, you know, we have lasted for, you know, 2 weeks without food, and we've lasted several days without water. But then he says, we're not going to last 2 minutes without hope. Can you imagine the ability to say such a thing in the middle of a concentration camp? And the reason why the story goes on is because there's an ultimate truth in it. So, you know, to respond about our worry and disappointments and fears, which are real, what does hope mean? It can't only mean that we're going to wait and hopefully it gets better. I don't think that's what it is. I think hope is our commitment to drive ourselves through the mud of the sea and over the course of a journey to go towards the promised land. Sorry about my dog. And maybe my headphones, you can't hear her. But I think you do. She's kind of loud. Oh yeah, journey, promised land. Got it. So that's our example of hope, and that's why Israel is the embodiment. And Israel's in the midst of lots of challenges too. You know, it's not so easy there, but I'm not willing for somebody to rob me of Israel as the embodiment of hope. I'm not willing to let a leader, no matter who it is or what party they're from, take away a conviction that we can get through this together, and that I can't guarantee that I'm going to be okay, but I can guarantee that I can live my life with integrity because of that goodness, compassion, and grace. Yeah, Louise. Go ahead. There you go. There you go.
you were talking about meaning, and I was thinking about looking at the sky this morning and how clean it is, how quiet it is. I'm not sure what the meaning will end up doing or having results, but the fact that there's so much less pollution now, that we're all quiet and not going around, it's got to lead to something, some important lesson or some important change in our behavior. And I think there's some meaning. I'm not sure what the meaning will be. That's it.
That's it. Good job. I agree. I think that there can be great meaning here. And I think, you know, even in terms of our planet, it shows that we have the ability, if we choose, to make great changes in our world and in our lives. What are you willing to give up? What are we willing to let go of? What is really essential to you? And what I'm learning is that what's really essential to me is goodness, grace, and compassion. That's essential to me. Hope is essential to me. A home office is super lovely and comfortable, and I feel fortunate that I have it. Essential? No, not really. You know, what's essential? And if we can figure out what's essential, it's also easier to, I think, it's a little easier to have a sense of what to be hopeful for. Who do you know, out of all of the people that you've encountered, whoever said on my stone that when I die, they want to have on it, I hope I made enough money. I hope I went to enough meetings. They're going to say what's essential, right? And so we're using that word a lot these days. So let's figure out what's essential. For me, hope. I can't do anything without it. People are sending me, which I think is lovely, messages of you know, that they hope that I'm doing okay because I'm trying to manage a congregation in the midst of a pandemic, and they did not bring this up in seminary. So how do you manage this? Hope. It's really that simple for me. But I've been working on this for a while. I get that. But I know that my spiritual work and my social work and my ethical work and my family presence, and for me, very much a God that's present in my life, that I get to tap into those reservoirs of strength and keep on trucking. And I think being generous and kind and caring and gracious and grateful helps me to move all of that forward. Anyone else have a closing thought or question? No? So, what? David, you're muted. Are you trying to say something? David, are you talking to us? You have to unmute yourself, Wojciech.
Yay.
Okay.
I thought you were going to say something connected to what Jeff's comment was in the chat about gratitude, or
Yeah.
is that what you've already been talking about?
Well, you know, I didn't get to it so much because, you know, I was riffing on all of your comments, but, you know, I think of gratitude in a similar way as hope. I think people think that being grateful and being thankful is is kind of the same thing. And I don't. I think thanks is a wonderful feeling. Being grateful requires action. And gratitude is something that's going to move me from A to B. Gratitude is going to help me take my feelings of thanks and feel empowered to pay it forward and to do more and to deliver masks to somebody who doesn't have one. Which, by the way, Har Hashem still has a number from a congregant who made some, and if anybody doesn't have a mask, you can just send me an email and we'll set you up. I think that gratitude is really empowering. The challenge about gratitude in our world is, and I think Jeff, you're right in your chat. We're kind of trained to always want more. America values gratitude, but it teaches us to consume more and want more of what we don't have. And that creates unease, or if you want to be clever about it, dis-ease. And enough dis-ease turns into disease and can get us in trouble if we can never really have a sense of satisfaction, contentment. As an introvert, I'm pretty content. I can stay in this room for a really long time. You know, I really feel for you extroverts. That this must be really hard. You know, I'm fine. But I think that's the power of gratitude. I think it's super empowering, and in a similar way, it takes an emotion that we have, and when we act it out, it actually becomes healing. And I think most of us, if not all of us, find healing, not curing, healing, wholeness, in our meaning making, when we are actively making meaning. And that's what I wanted to share with you really for today. So I hope that helps a little bit. If you've been feeling down or challenged or alone, there's a couple of minutes and you can give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down. I know Jeff digs this, but I think there's a power of music. I'm not going to sing for you, but there's a power in music, and there's a woman who I think wrote a piece that is really very powerful, and it's called "Comfort Us." And Joy Alice, if you're okay with it, I can share it. And if everybody is interested in having something that could be something to turn to when we're feeling charged or anxious in not a good way, I'm happy to share it now with everybody. I pulled it up for you. And if you don't really want to see it, then you can just leave. But or if you want to hear it, you're open for like 2 minutes of a melody for you. Yeah. Is that okay with you?
I think that would be wonderful. And in
Awesome.
case some people leave, I just want to thank you, Rabbi Green, for being here. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm grateful for this community. And I just want to say that I really appreciate these words of encouragement. And hope for me is really thinking about all of the positive things that we don't know could come from all of this, and that's what I hold on to for all of us. And I would love to hear some music. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you so much for bringing us together. So the woman who's singing is Alana Arian, who I know since I'm a teenager, and she was like one of my rabbi's daughters and faculty brat at camp. And she's become an incredible Jewish musician. So here it goes. I'm gonna make it a little bit bigger for you, and we'll play this.
Nachamu, Nachamu, Ami Yomar Eloheichem, Nachamu, Nachamu, Ami Yomar Eloheichem, Nachamu. As we struggle with this world, Nachamu, Nachamu, Ami Yomar Eloheichem, Nachamu, Nachamu, Ami Yomar Eloheichem. Comfort us in our wilderness. Comfort us as we struggle to take care of one another. Comfort us in our wilderness. Comfort us as we struggle with this world. Nachamu.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Take good care, everybody. Thanks for bringing us together, Joy Alice, and hope everybody stays well.